Hello and welcome again to the 3rd Annual Small Farm Expo. Thank you all for coming out today. I hope you're enjoying good-to-go meat pies and perfect blend espresso. Get your tea, get your coffee, and then come on back to the speaker area in the back right corner if you'd like to learn a little bit more about low-stress animal handling for a healthy herd and happy farmer. We have Dr. Sandra Matheson here. Low-stress animal handling is not only for the safety and well-being of the animals, but also for the safety and well-being of the farmer. Today you'll be introduced to the basics of working with animals that takes into consideration how animals think, see, and feel. A few simple modifications to movement and surroundings can make this process a much better experience for all of you. Dr. Sandra Matheson, a lifelong farmer, educator, filmmaker, author, speaker, and retired veterinarian. She lives and ranches in Bellingham, Washington. She has a place off of Smith Road where she runs a cow-calf operation, grass-fed beef and yak business, and Sandra is an accredited consultant, field professional in holistic management. She's also a certified consensus facilitator, and she's worked throughout Washington and the United States, presenting, teaching, facilitating various aspects of agricultural, holistic management, and consensus building. So I'd like to welcome Sandra Matheson.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about low-stress animal handling. And what does that really mean? It means getting the animals to go where you want them to go, or I should say letting them go where you want them to go without getting them excited. That's one aspect of it. The other part is to let them think it's their idea, because when you think about it, you really can't make an animal do something unless you physically pick it up and lift it, right? So you really want it to be their idea, and that's going to reduce the stress as well. And if you're really good at it, they don't even know that they're being handled. That's really the key. That's kind of the ultimate. And so on my farm, most of the time if I need to move my animals, I just call them. They know the routine. I call them. They move into the next paddock. But there are some times when I need to collect them from the paddock, and they're quite happy just being out there on the pasture and grazing, and they have no interest in going up to the barn for whatever reason I want them to go. And so this is when we have to employ a few techniques. So there are two main gurus of low-stress animal handling. The first one is Bud Williams, and he was the person that I learned this concept from. And I was very fortunate when he was still alive that I was able to take a workshop with him, and he was amazing, and it really changed the way that I did things at home, the way I thought about handling the animals and thinking about things from their perspective as well. And the other being Temple Grandin, which most of you are familiar with. And she is an amazing person and has an amazing perspective on seeing things the way animals see them. And so there are a lot of really good books out there. Oops, I forgot to bring my book, but a lot of good publications out there, articles. And she actually will be in Stanwood, I understand, next year for the Country Living Expo. Yeah, so she'll be here in Spokane, and then also must be March, she'll be down in Pendleton, Oregon as well. So these are the two people that I've learned most of my concepts from, and I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity to learn those. Okay, so how do we go about doing it? Well, it really requires a lot of understanding of animal psychology and how animals think. It also helps that you have very well-defined facilities. And not all of us are going to be able to go out and afford, this fancy bud box or, all the big curved setups, all the fancy things. But we can make do the best we can with what we have just by making some simple modifications. It doesn't have to be expensive. It just needs to be set up in a way that's going to help that animal want to go where you want it to go. And again, seeing things things from an animal's perspective. One of the big things that I learned was that when you expect an animal to go into, whether it's a trailer or go into a chute or an alley, is that you need to get down on their level, really get down and look and see what they're seeing. Because sometimes there'll be something flapping in the wind. Just an example, a couple weeks ago I had a steer that hurt himself. I needed to get him in the chute. The first day he went in to get doctored up just fine. The second day he wouldn't go in, and I couldn't figure out why he wouldn't go in. And then I thought, look at it from his perspective. So I got down and looked from his angle, and there was a chicken standing in the chute. And even though he weighed about 700 pounds more than that chicken, there was no way he was going to go close to that chicken. So anyway, I herded the hen out, and then he went right in. So you need to get down, make sure there are no weird shadows, make sure there are no things flapping in the wind or chickens in the way. And this is probably one of the most important things, is that the handler, the person who's doing the herding, needs to be well behaved as well. Because, you can imagine if somebody's going out there and yelling and hollering and swinging sticks and, that's a little bit terrifying for the animals. And so we have to learn to handle our animals, trying not to say anything at all. And that's really hard. That is really hard to do, because that's what we're all accustomed to, is kind of yell at them a little bit to get to going, or say unpleasant things when they don't. But we really have to try to be quiet and really just use our body position, use pressure points. We'll talk about that. Okay, why do we want low stress animal handling? Because first of all, do we want stress? Want stress? No, we do not want stress. And why don't we want stress? Because it can cause a number of things. One is it makes the animals a little bit more susceptible to disease if they're under a lot of stress. We often can see weight loss. Behavioral problems. If animals have a bad experience, they will remember that. If something really frightens them, or a particular person frightens them, or somebody wearing a hat frightens them, they will remember that, and they'll be very difficult, and they'll be very stressed the next time they need to be handled. A lot of times it can cause some digestive problems as well. If they're under constant stress, they may not digest. They may not, function very well, and so therefore they can't gain weight, and they're not going to thrive. You can even have some reproductive effects if you have a lot of stress going on. I can remember one example many years ago when we had apparently neighbor dogs coming in and running the cattle every night, and until someone else got rid of them, I guess. But those animals lost weight. They were very agitated, they were very nervous, and the interesting thing was, though, that on a positive aspect is they were all due to calve during that time, and every one of them waited at least, a couple weeks until the dogs were gone, and then they started to calve. It was really interesting that it would even have that effect. But there can be many negative effects as well when you have a lot of stress. If you're in the meat business, animals that are horribly frightened oftentimes will suffer a lot of bruises if they're handled roughly, and also the meat can turn very dark, and of course that meat is discounted. So what determines the degree of stress that animals have when you're handling them? What is the amount of contact that they have with people? If you've got range animals that, the only time they see somebody is when they're loaded in the trailer to go to the high country, and then loaded in the trailer to come back, those animals are going to have, they're going to be pretty nervous to be around people, particularly people on foot. How they've been handled, the animals do remember. They do remember bad experiences, and they also remember good experiences as well. So how they are handled will determine that degree of stress. Genetics. It doesn't matter what you do, there are going to be some animals that are going to be difficult, what we call high-headed, nervous, the ones that when the herd's going one way, they see you and they just take off the other direction. And sometimes they take the whole herd with them. And those animals oftentimes will pass that on to their offspring, not only with displaying their own behavior, but also genetically. I tried one time. I had a cow that was just, for whatever reason, years ago, just nasty. Don't know why she turned out that way, but I mean, she would try to run at me at 100 yards. She didn't stay very long. But she had a calf, and I thought, well, yeah, I'm good at this. I'm going to raise this calf because I wanted the cow out of there. So I took the calf off, bottle fed the calf, and I thought the calf's going to be fine. Well, when that calf was 4 months old, that calf tried to kill me. And it was like, okay, I think there's a little genetic problem. So she went down the road too. So sometimes genetics are ingrained. You can have, if you use the wrong bull that has a bad temperament, you're going to have a whole calf crop that could just be trouble for you. Okay, so how does this concept work? Okay, we're going to talk about the flight zone, and I love this picture because this is perfect. You can see the animals flight, what we call the flight zone. In other words, they don't want to be any closer than that to those humans, right? So actually I'd like to, can I have a volunteer? I just want to try something. Any volunteers? Anybody want to come up? Oh, okay, yeah, come on up. Let me take this. Actually, we'll stay down there. It's a little safer. If it'll reach. Okay, so how are you feeling right now? Okay, yeah. So I want you to pretend that you're a cow. You're out grazing a pasture. Just kind of take a deep breath, and you're just taking it easy, and everything's fine. Okay, so I'm going to come up a little bit closer. So, how you feeling? Okay, all right. Okay, I made her a little nervous. All right, that's fine. You can go ahead and sit down. So speakers, I guess. So what I was trying to demonstrate there was that she had what we call her personal space if we're talking about humans. And if we're talking about animals, we're talking about a flight zone. So she had a space where she was very comfortable. I'm going to go back. So she had a space that was where she felt comfortable. But when I got in her space, got right up to her, she was like, okay, I'm not very comfortable with this. I kind of want out of there. And so what I did, and we'll go to the next one here, is I used what we call pressure and release. So I went up to her, made her, a little bit uncomfortable that she wanted to move, and then I stepped back, and she was like, I could tell, she was like, oh, that's better. So that's what we call pressure and release. And we're going to talk about how we use those techniques in just a moment. But that's one of the key things, is to use that flight zone or that personal space those animals have, and use the concept of pressure and release to get those animals to go where where you want them to go, but letting them think it's their idea. Okay. I'm going to watch the time here. I just want to talk about some movement patterns. Animals see very well. They can see kind of on both sides. They can't see directly in back of them. And they always want to know kind of where you are. So one of the things that you can do, for instance, if I want to go out and gather the herd that's grazing out in the pasture, I want to get a few animals moving. So I'm going to walk up to them on this angle here, kind of walk almost into the side, and then they'll move a little bit. I mean, I'm not stressing them out. They're just, oh, she's there, so I'm going to move. So they start to move, and then I go around and I do that to a few animals that are kind of in the back of the herd to kind of get them to start moving in the direction that I want them to go. But this is kind of where you would start to apply a little pressure, and then you back off. If you keep applying pressure, they're going to get nervous, they're going to turn around, they're going to look at you, and they're going to stop. So you want to be able to apply pressure and then back away. Okay, so I've got a bunch of animals, so once I've got a few of them starting to move or heading in the right direction, I'm going to do this sort of zigzag pattern, kind of back and forth. So I'm going to be walking back and forth. It's basically a zigzag like that, and sometimes I have to maybe move around the corner of the herd a little bit. or maybe I have to do it over on this side a little bit, but I keep constantly moving. And the reason to keep moving is if I stop, those animals, again, are going to wonder, some of them can't see me, they're going to turn around and they're going to look for me, and they're going to stop their movement. So it's really important to just kind of keep zigzagging back and forth, keep them moving, and not to stop. If you're in a position where maybe you have a narrow area and you can't walk very far, then you can just kind of rock back and forth. But you just keep moving so that they can see you out maybe from this side, maybe see you from this side. But if you stop, they will stop as well. And if you see some really good working herding dogs, this is what they do. They zigzag back and forth. So that's how they work, and that's how we can work. It's a very simple concept. It just takes a little bit of practice. If you have animals in like a narrow area, you're trying to move them through an alley to get them to go into the chute, then you use this pattern. It seems kind of counterintuitive, right? The animals are walking this way, and I'm going to walk right next to them this way. And again, it kind of get into their personal space. I get into their flight zone, makes them a little nervous, so they actually walk faster in this direction. If I came from behind really close, they would probably stop because they can't see me real well and they want to look at me. So instead, animals are coming, you want them to come this way, really close to them, just keep walking in that direction. But again, you peel off, you take the pressure off so that you're making this sort of triangular pattern. Does that make sense? It seems not the natural thing to do, but it really is very effective. And so that, when you do that, then you're not having to yell at them or whack them or anything like that. You just walk along the chute and you'd be surprised how well they will move forward for you. Okay, and if you want to get them to stop, then you kind of get behind them where they can't see you very well. And you stop, and then they will stop, because they want to kind of see where you're at. So those are just some really basic things that you can do when you're working with your animals. One of the things I will tell you, the first day I came home after the Bud Williams workshop, and it was a really, really hot day, and I was so excited, and I went right out to the pasture, and I thought, I'm going to move these cows, and I've got this, right? So I went out there, and my cows are kind of tame, and so I did the whole pressure walking into the flank thing, and they didn't even move. I kind of ran into them, and I tried it again, and it really made me kind of mad. But I remembered, take a deep breath, be calm, don't say anything. So I just kept doing it, and it took me about 45 minutes, but I got to the point where I could move that herd anywhere I wanted to move them. And all it was about 45 minutes. And those were animals that, they were, probably too tame, but eventually they got the idea, probably just got annoyed at me, I think. But they got the idea that I apply pressure and I released, and then they comfortably just went where I wanted them to go. So anyway, it just takes a lot of practice, and the hardest thing is just to be quiet and to not say anything and just keep moving. And really, if you want to learn more about it, I would recommend especially Temple Grandin's books or some of the articles. There's really a lot of wonderful information in there, very useful information. Okay, so you say, well, it's easy for you to say because you've been through the workshop and such. But, oops, let me go back here. So we had New Cowgirl Camp in Spokane that my friend Beth and I facilitated. And this woman is 66 years old, retired doctor, and she doesn't know anything about farming or cattle, but she was thinking about having animals. And so she had an opportunity to go out and try to handle the sheep. So she went out there and she was scared to death. I mean, you can see her arms are stiff. She was like, literally like that, and she didn't know what to do. So Beth was starting to coach her. You see the animals, she's just come up there. They haven't really noticed her yet. So Beth started to give her some instruction, and you can see she's starting to move now and starting to zigzag. So the sheep turned around, they saw her, but then they saw the pattern that she was doing, and she was applying pressure and releasing it. So then they finally began to move. And the thing that I want you to notice is now she is relaxed. She's figured out, I can do this. It's not that hard. I'm constantly moving. I just had a little bit of instruction. I mean, look at her arms. Her arms are relaxed, and she's relaxed, and she really enjoyed it. And she moved those sheep, all over the paddock there. So it doesn't take much. Just takes a little instruction, maybe a little reading, and a little bit of practice. Oh, I think we're just about done. I think I've got about one more slide. Okay, so tips. Have adequate facilities. If you're going to have animals, please have good facilities that you can catch your animals. Doesn't have to be fancy, but try to maybe study how animals think. It's nice to have like a curved alley if you can do it. If you don't have a big fancy setup, you can do it with panels, but you need to have a way to catch your animals. Next, you need to get down and see things from your animal's perspective. Are there weird shadows that are frightening them? Anything, even whether it's a shadow or, for instance, I have a little trench or whatever where the barn door opens and closes. It's very difficult to get an animal across that, even though it's 4 inches deep and 3 inches wide. It's like they think it's a huge chasm they're going to fall into, and so it's very difficult for them. So really see things from an animal's perspective, because they don't know if a shadow is a deep hole or just a shadow. Be quiet and calm. Again, the hardest thing to do is just not talk, just keep moving. And keep moving. Remove any distractions that you can. So before you catch those animals in the barn, if you need to work with them, go around and remove anything, like I said, that might be flapping in the wind, or the chickens, or whatever it might be, anything that's a distraction, anything really brightly colored, so that it will be less distracting for them. Reduce the shadows if you can. Animals are afraid to walk into shadows. Again, as I said, they don't know about whether, they don't have great depth perception. But the other thing is, too, that animals do not like to walk from light into dark. And so when you're trying to put them in the trailer, try to have light in the trailer, or put shavings in the bottom so it's lighter for them. But if you want to expect those animals to go into a dark trailer, they're not going to want to go. And the same goes if they're coming from the barn, coming from the outside and going into a chute or an alley in the barn, and all of a sudden it's just really dark in there. That's pretty scary for them. So have some light, or open a barn door on the other end so that they can see some light that they can go to. That's another important tip. So remember, low stress equals a happy herd and happy farmers. And again, you can use this on any species. I haven't tried herding cats before, but that'd be interesting. Okay, and one last thing. What's wrong with this picture here? What do you see here? You want the animals to go in. There's shadows. Yep, there's a lot of shadows. The animal has no idea if those are holes or just shadows. Anything else you see? Anything? Okay, a couple of things I noticed in this picture. Of course, we've got some holes here, and so you need to be sure there's not some dog standing outside there, or a little kid, or something distracting or making noise out there. So you really have to look and see what's beyond here, or cover them up if possible. The other thing is there's some sort of cable or apparatus hanging down there, and that could be like a snake to a cow. They don't know the difference, and so those are things that you really want to look at it from an animal's perspective. So that's all I have. Do you have any questions? I think we've got just a couple minutes.
So you talk about shadows, but moving an animal at nighttime, which especially when they're calving or lambing in my particular case, how do you handle that? Because obviously you can't remove shadows when it's nighttime, and you're not trying to move an entire herd now, you're trying to get a specific animal, and I find that to be the most challenging part.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because animals want to be part of a herd. It is very difficult to separate one animal off. Sometimes, it depends on the particular animal. Sometimes they're okay with you, they trust you enough. and especially if they're having calving problems, they're having other problems, sometimes they just know that you want to help, and you know they'll cooperate. But a lot of times you need to bring other animals with them, and more than one other extra animal usually as well. They want to know that part of the herd is moving. So if you can bring more animals with you, that's fine. And as for at night, I mean everything's dark, and so it's not that contrast. It's the contrast that's kind of the scary thing for them. And then if you want them to go into the barn, turn some lights onto the barn. They're more apt to go from the dark to the light.